Section 3. Wild Animal Sovereigns. Let us now turn to the case of wild animals, those whose evolutionary trajectory has not been deliberately shaped by humans, and who remain independent of humans to meet their basic needs for food, shelter, etc. Within the broad category of non-domesticated animals, we find many different kinds of human-animal relations. We will begin by considering the case of truly wild animals, i.e., those animals who avoid all humans and human settlement, maintaining a separate and independent existence insofar as they are able to, in their own shrinking habitats. In this case, the model of co-citizenship in a mixed human-animal community which we've just outlined for domesticated animals is neither feasible nor desirable. Nonetheless, wild animals are still vulnerable to a wide range of injustices at the hands of human beings, and any comprehensive theory of animal rights must address these. One threat, of course, is that the violation of the basic inviolable rights that all animals have in virtue of being conscious individuals. Such violations include hunting and trapping, or the capturing of wild animals for zoos or medical experimentation. These are the sorts of violations that AR theorists have generally focused on, and for most AR theorists, the primary injunction is, therefore, in Reagan's words, to let them be, i.e., to stop violating their basic rights and leave wild animals to get on with their lives. However, this exclusive focus on inviolable rights has been widely criticized as both too little and too much. It is seen as too little because there are many other threats and injustices to wild animals beyond the deliberate violation of such basic rights. These include the rapid loss of wild animal habitat by encroaching human settlement or development, the harmful side effects of human activity like pollution and climate change, and a wide range of inadvertent harms from contact with human activities and infrastructure, e.g. highways, tall buildings, shipping lanes. Traditional animal rights theory has had little to say about these harms. It has also been seen as too much, because recognizing a right to life for wild animals seems to entail not just a prohibition on the harming of animals by humans, but also a positive duty of assistance to intervene in nature whenever animals are suffering. Respecting a right to life for animals in the wild seems to require systematic intervention to end predation and to protect animals from natural processes such as food shortages, floods, or exposure. A reductio ad absurdum envisions the creation of soy protein worms for birds, or installation of central heating and wildlife dens in order to meet human duties of positive assistance to wild animals with a right to life. In our view, these problems can't be resolved from within a traditional AR theory perspective that focuses solely on the intrinsic moral standing of animals. As we've seen, that question underdetermines our moral obligations to particular animals or humans, which vary with the nature of our relationship to them. And so the first question we need to ask concerns the appropriate relationship between human and wild animal communities. If that relationship is not one of co-citizenship, as with domesticated animals, what is it? Our suggestion is that the relationship is best captured by ideas of sovereignty. That is, we should view wild animals as forming organized communities, competent in general to address the challenges they face and to look after their own needs and interests, who typically neither need nor want their lives to be managed or governed by humans. As with sovereign human communities, respect for norms of sovereignty does not preclude various forms of aid and assistance, or even in extreme circumstances, intervention. We will discuss some cases below. However, respect for sovereignty entails that intervention be constrained by recognition of the inclination and competence of wild animals to live apart from human control in their own self-regulating societies and a commitment to supporting that capacity. Extending the idea of sovereignty to wild animal communities may seem like a strained analogy, but there are important comparisons between the injustices wild animals suffer and those suffered by various human communities, whose self-government and sovereign control of territory have historically been denied. Throughout human history, stronger nations have engaged in acts of colonization or conquest over weaker nations, and have justified this on the grounds that the subordinated people were incompetent to govern themselves, or were being wrongfully denied the fruits of civilization, or on the grounds that the subordinated people did not even exist. For example, European colonizers defining Australia as terra nullius. The colonized or conquered are then subjected to processes of displacement, often pushing them onto other poorer lands, which in turn generate resource and cultural conflicts with the pre-existing population on those lands. We see similar dynamics at work in relation to wild animals. Recall that for the moment we are considering truly wild animals, i.e., those who avoid and flee humans and our efforts to regulate their lives. Human development is seen as transforming empty land, ignoring the organized communities of wild animals that already exist on that land, either killing them or displacing them onto other lands that are already occupied by other animal communities. The obvious remedy for this chain of injustices, as in the human case, is to establish norms of respect for the sovereignty of existing communities, prohibiting acts of aggression, colonization, and displacement. Recognizing the sovereignty of a territorial-based community means recognizing that the people inhabiting the territory have a right to be there and to determine the shape of their communal life, and that they have the ability to do so. In our view, this sovereignty approach avoids the too little too much dilemma confronting traditional animal rights theory. On the one hand, it goes beyond simply protecting wild animals from direct violations of their basic rights, to also ensuring protection for their habitat and their independence. On the other hand, it also helps explain why we are neither obligated nor generally permitted to intervene in cases of predation or food cycles. The sovereignty model assumes that wild animals are competent to address the challenges they face. And of course, predation and food cycles are two of the core challenges facing all non-domesticated animal communities. The fact that wild animal communities cannot protect all of their members from predation or starvation is not evidence of incompetence. This is not evidence that they are the animal equivalent of failed states. On the contrary, wild animals show remarkable skill in responding to these challenges, evading predation, storing food and energy, protecting their young, and so on. In this sense, it is entirely inaccurate to equate wild animals with defenseless children. Indeed, on some parameters, such as living sustainably in relation to resource limitations, wild animals are arguably far more competent than humans. It is worth emphasizing here that our defense of a sovereignty model is not based on the idea that natural processes are somehow benign or sacred. The suffering involved in predation and food cycles is morally significant, and it is always appropriate to ask what can be done to alleviate suffering. But a sovereignty approach requires that we situate our concern for suffering within a larger framework, which recognizes that wild animals form independent, self-regulating communities, and that they have an interest in autonomy and freedom from human management of their communal lives. Any human attempt to systematically transform animal lives or animal habitats to eliminate predation or food cycles would fail this moral test. Imagine a proposal to re-engineer the natural world to prevent wild animals from competing for scarce food or territory, or to separate prey from predators. In effect, to give every wild animal its own safe and secure habitat, turning nature into a well-managed zoo, in which each animal has its own safe enclosure and guaranteed food source. Clearly, any attempt to implement this would fail in practical terms, and almost certainly lead to unintended ecological havoc, but on our view, it would also be a morally objectionable violation of wild animal sovereignty interests, since it would involve the wholesale and omnipresent human management of wild animal communities. This is precisely what the norm of sovereignty rules out, in order to respect the inclination and capacities of wild animals to live independently of us. To be sure, the autonomy of sovereign communities, whether human or animal, is not absolute, and there may indeed be cases where wild animal communities are unable to deal with certain challenges, and so move closer to failed states or burdened states, justifying external intervention. Imagine an asteroid on a collision course with sovereign animal territory. If humans can blast the asteroid off its course, we should do so. Such an intervention supports, rather than undermines, their sovereignty. Indeed, there may be many cases in which humans can assist wild animals without becoming their overlords. For example, by reversing processes of desertification or by seeding new ocean reefs. And, on the micro scale, careful one-off interventions to rescue individual wild animals, whether out of compassion or simply because one is in a position to do so, rarely undermine animal sovereignty. If I can rescue a deer who has fallen through the ice, or release a beached whale back to open water, I am not undermining the autonomous self-direction of the animal community. Scale and intent matter when it comes to the question of intervention and its impact on sovereignty, and the end goal of legitimate intervention should be precisely to respect and restore functioning sovereignty. In other words, legitimate intervention supports independent viability. Illegitimate intervention creates a state of ongoing dependency and external management. In our view, the sovereignty framework provides an intellectually compelling way of balancing concern for suffering with concern for self-determination. In many cases, it will reach the same conclusion as the "let them be" presumption, which currently dominates the AR theory literature. But it provides a clearer intellectual rationale both for that presumption and for the many exceptions to it. Sovereignty also provides a normative framework for addressing another crucial issue that has been under-theorized, namely spillover effects. As we noted earlier, wild animals are vulnerable to harm not just from direct violations of their basic rights or from encroachment on their territory, but also from a range of inadvertent harms due to the impacts of human activity. These include risks from pollution, e.g. oil spills, agricultural runoff, climate change, and from infrastructure, e.g. dams, fences, roads, buildings, shipping lanes. Some of these risks would be reduced if we stopped encroaching on the habitat of wild animals, but it's important to note that there is no possibility of hermetically sealing human territory from wild animal territory. For one thing, many wild animals migrate over vast distances, including over or through areas of human settlement and vice versa. For example, white-throat warblers migrate annually from the Sahel in Africa to woodlands in Britain, passing over many areas of human settlement. Even if we designated their two primary habitats as their sovereign territory, they are put at risk whenever we put up glass towers along their flight path, or degrade the water and food sources at their resting spots. Similarly, northern right whales migrate from the coast off New Zealand to winter calving grounds off Florida, a route that overlaps some of the world's busiest shipping lanes in a way that continually imposes risks of injury and death. These risks are not all in one direction. Wild animals can pose a threat to human activity, e.g. road collisions with deer or moose, birds jamming airplane engines, or to public health, e.g. animal viruses, or indeed of direct attack, e.g. from grizzly bears or elephants. Such risks are inevitable so long as both humans and wild animals continue to share the planet. And so a crucial task of a theory of animal rights is to determine the appropriate principles for regulating these risks. How should we take into account the interests of wild animals when designing our buildings, roads, shipping lanes, pollution codes, and so on? And conversely, what actions can we legitimately undertake to reduce the risks we face from wild animals? At the moment, we treat these two issues in diametrically opposite ways. Where wild animals pose a risk to humans, no matter how small, we typically think we are entitled to take any measures to eliminate the risk, even the most lethal measures. If wolves pose even a tiny risk to humans, we feel entitled to cull them en masse. But where our activities impose grave threats on wild animals, we often dismiss this as the price of progress. A sovereignty framework, by contrast, insists that we treat the distribution of risks as an issue of justice between sovereign communities. And here we can learn from existing norms in the intrahuman case. Social life, both domestically and internationally, inevitably involves risks, and imposing risks on others is not inherently unjust, so long as a number of conditions are met, including A. The imposed risks are genuinely necessary to achieve some legitimate interest, and are proportional to that benefit, and not just the result of negligence or callous disregard. B. Both the risks and the attendant benefits are equitably shared overall. The people who suffer risk in one context benefit from risks in other contexts, rather than one group being continually the victims of imposed risk. C. Society compensates, where possible, the victims of inadvertent harm. In our view, these principles provide guidelines for thinking about fair terms of interaction between sovereign human and wild animal communities. This would mean, for example, that we should relocate and redesign cars, roads, buildings, and other infrastructure to reduce animal impacts and create effective animal corridors and buffer zones. It also means that when animals are inadvertently injured through contact with human activity, despite our best efforts to minimize these risks, we should set up wildlife rescue centers for their rehabilitation and hopefully release back to the wild. And we need to learn to live with reasonable risks from the presence of wild animals.